Let's talk about what it really means when someone with an avoidant attachment style offers you friendship after a romantic connection ends or hits a wall. And let me be clear from the start. This is not always a gesture of kindness. Most of the time, it's a strategy that keeps them emotionally safe and you emotionally stuck. When an avoidant offers friendship after a breakup or emotional withdrawal, it's often misunderstood as a sign of emotional maturity or lingering care. But in most cases, it's not about closeness at all. It's about defense. For someone with an avoidant attachment style, intimacy is threatening. Vulnerability feels dangerous. So when the intensity of a romantic connection becomes overwhelming, the avoidant doesn't just pull away, they restructure the relationship into something safer. And that safe option often looks like friendship. But let's be clear, this kind of friendship is not about building a genuine connection rooted in mutual presence and emotional openness. It's a defensive maneuver. It allows the avoidant to maintain a certain level of proximity without having to engage with the emotional depth that a romantic relationship demands. By offering friendship, they're trying to preserve control. They're not leaning in, they're protecting themselves from the emotional vulnerability they weren't able or willing to face in the relationship. In their mind, offering friendship creates distance wrapped in a socially acceptable package. It helps them manage their discomfort with guilt, loss, or confrontation. They may not want to completely disappear because doing so might make them feel like the bad guy, or it might trigger their own fear of abandonment. Yes, even avoidants have that. So instead of fully letting go, they offer a friendship that feels emotionally manageable to them, regardless of how confusing it may be to you. Here's what makes this dynamic even more complicated to the anxious or emotionally invested partner. That friendship offer can feel like hope, like a stepping stone, like a door left half open. But for the avoidant, it's often just a way to ease their own emotional tension. It's not about meeting you in the middle, it's about avoiding the discomfort of emotional endings. They want the connection without the commitment, the closeness without the accountability. That's not closeness, that's control. It's important to understand this difference because accepting a friendship that's born out of avoidance rather than genuine emotional alignment puts you in an emotionally lopsided situation. You become the one holding space, hoping for more, staying emotionally available while they maintain a safe emotional distance. Over time, this creates resentment, confusion, and emotional exhaustion. True friendship, just like any meaningful connection, requires openness, vulnerability, and reciprocity. But when it's offered by someone who has consistently struggled with those very qualities in the romantic relationship, it's worth questioning the intention behind the offer. Is it really about preserving something meaningful between you, or is it just a shield, a defense, a way for them to avoid facing the emotional consequences of their behavior? When you recognize that the offer of friendship is a coping strategy for the avoidant, not an invitation for emotional closeness, you start to reclaim your clarity. And from that place, you can make a decision that serves your self-worth, not your fear of losing someone who was never fully emotionally available to begin with. When an avoidant offers friendship after withdrawing from a romantic connection, what they're often doing is creating a way to stay close enough to feel safe, but far enough to avoid vulnerability. It's emotional proximity without the emotional exposure. And that's a dynamic the avoidant is deeply familiar with because their attachment system is wired to protect them from the perceived dangers of intimacy. To an avoidant, emotional closeness feels like a threat to autonomy. Vulnerability isn't a bridge to connection, it's a risk. It means being seen, being dependent, being accountable to someone else's emotional needs. And for someone with an avoidant attachment style, especially one shaped by early experiences of emotional neglect, inconsistency, or enmeshment, that can feel suffocating. So they manage their internal discomfort by controlling the distance, and the offer of friendship becomes a perfect middle ground. It allows them to avoid the finality of a breakup while also sidestepping the emotional depth that romantic relationships require. They get to keep you around, to access the comfort of your presence, the emotional familiarity, the validation, but without the obligations of true emotional intimacy. It's a safe zone. They're no longer expected to show up fully. They don't have to explain their feelings, meet emotional needs, or face conflict. They just get to exist beside you in a way that feels emotionally manageable to them. The problem is, this dynamic isn't emotionally neutral. It's not just two people being friends. It's one person remaining emotionally guarded, while the other often still stays emotionally invested, confused, and still hoping. Because let's be honest, when someone we've been deeply connected to offers us friendship, we don't hear boundaries. We hear possibility. Especially if you're anxiously attached, it can feel like they're trying to work their way back toward you slowly. But that's rarely the case with an avoidant. In reality, they're trying to minimize emotional discomfort for themselves, not build a pathway to reconnection. By keeping you within arm's reach, they avoid the emotional rupture that comes with true separation. They avoid their own grief, guilt, or self-reflection. You become a buffer against their own emotional process, while you're stuck in emotional limbo. What makes this so painful is the illusion of closeness. The check-ins, the just seeing how you're doing, texts, the occasional warmth. It can all feel like care, but often it's just emotional maintenance. It's just enough to preserve the connection, but not enough to deepen it. And as long as they can access you without being emotionally vulnerable, there's no urgency to change, no incentive to grow, no reason to confront their own avoidance. So when you're offered friendship by an avoidant, it's important to ask yourself, what do I really want? Because unless you want a connection built on emotional distance and self-protection, the version of friendship they're offering may not be friendship at all. It may just be a safer version of avoidance in disguise. When an avoidant offers friendship after pulling away from a romantic relationship, it's often less about staying connected to you and more about managing their own internal discomfort, specifically the guilt or emotional tension they feel for retreating. Avoidants don't typically process emotions in a direct or vulnerable way. Instead, they intellectualize, compartmentalize, and try to reduce emotional intensity. So when they end a relationship, create distance, or stop showing up in the way you once knew, they often feel a low-grade emotional dissonance. They may not fully confront or articulate it, but it's there. And that's where the offer of friendship comes in. Friendship becomes a strategy. It's a way to relieve the burden of having hurt you, disappointed you, or caused emotional confusion. On the surface, it looks like kindness. It sounds like a peace offering, but underneath it's often about self-soothing. It's a way for the avoidant to say, I'm not the bad guy. I still care. I didn't abandon them. I offered something. And in that narrative, they preserve a sense of emotional comfort for themselves. This isn't always done maliciously or even consciously. In fact, many avoidants are completely unaware of this pattern. They may genuinely believe that offering friendship is the right thing to do, but it's important to understand the underlying motivation. The friendship is not always about connection. It's about clearing their own emotional content. And here's where it gets complicated for the person on the receiving end. You might interpret their offer as emotional maturity or hope for future reconciliation. But what you don't see is that the avoidant is often trying to control the emotional fallout without fully facing it. They don't want the emotional weight of your sadness, disappointment, or anger. And so, offering you friendship allows them to create an illusion of goodwill while avoiding true emotional accountability. It's a way to bypass the discomfort that comes with facing the impact of their withdrawal. Because if they were to sit in that discomfort, if they were to truly witness the pain they caused or the intimacy they shut down, they'd have to confront emotions they're not equipped to handle. Guilt, shame, regret, vulnerability. These emotions threaten their inner equilibrium. So instead, they extend an olive branch in the form of friendship, not realizing that what they're actually doing is continuing a dynamic of emotional avoidance. The result? You're left holding emotional tension they couldn't process. You're stuck in a dynamic that feels unresolved, unclear, and unbalanced. And unless you recognize the motive behind the offer, you might find yourself clinging to a connection that isn't truly reciprocal. Understanding that this friendship may be more about their guilt than your connection is key, because then you can stop reading into it. You can stop making it mean something about your worth. And you can start asking yourself, do I want to stay in someone's life just to help them feel better about leaving mine? That's the real question. When an avoidant offers friendship after distancing themselves from a romantic relationship, and the anxious partner accepts, it often sets the stage for a painfully one-sided emotional dynamic. This dynamic is subtle, yet deeply impactful, because it keeps one person emotionally invested and the other emotionally removed. It feels like connection, but it's really just proximity without reciprocity, closeness without commitment. And for the anxious partner, It becomes a trap that's hard to recognize until you're already in deep. Anxiously attached individuals crave closeness and fear abandonment. They often equate connection with safety, even if that connection is inconsistent or emotionally unavailable. So when the avoidant partner pulls away, but then offers friendship, it feels like a lifeline. It feels like hope, like a possible path back to intimacy, even if it's a long shot. Accepting the friendship becomes a way to stay emotionally close, to avoid the unbearable pain of full rejection, and to hold on to the fantasy that maybe, just maybe, the avoidant will come back around. But the cost of that hope is high. The anxious partner begins to operate in emotional overdrive, constantly analyzing every message, every interaction, every moment of warmth for signs of something deeper. They remain emotionally present, often overextending themselves to maintain the connection, while the avoidant maintains distance, boundaries, and control. This creates an emotional imbalance, where one person is hoping and the other is managing. One is investing, while the other is protecting. Over time, the anxious partner may begin to suppress their true feelings. They don't want to rock the boat or push the avoidant away further, so they silence their emotional needs. They settle for crumbs of connection, small check-ins, and shallow communication, all while longing for the intimacy that used to exist, or that never fully developed. This self-abandonment reinforces the very insecurity they were trying to avoid in the first place. What's even more damaging is that this dynamic keeps the anxious partner emotionally tethered to someone who isn't actually meeting them where they are. They can't fully move on, because they haven't really let go. And the avoidant, consciously or not, benefits from this. They get the comfort of your presence, without the responsibility of your heart. They avoid the discomfort of loss, without having to give more than they're emotionally capable of offering. So what seems like a peaceful friendship is often just emotional limbo. And unless the anxious partner becomes aware of this dynamic, they'll keep reliving the pain of rejection in slow motion, prolonging their healing and reinforcing the core belief that love is always just out of reach. Breaking free from this one-sided dynamic requires radical honesty about your needs, your worth, and what friendship really means. If the connection doesn't support mutual emotional growth and presence, then it's not friendship, it's an attachment wound playing out in disguise. And the most self-loving choice you can make is to step out of that loop and choose peace over proximity. True emotional intimacy and friendship are not the same thing, and confusing the two, especially in the aftermath of a romantic relationship with an avoidant partner, can lead to deep emotional confusion, unmet needs, and prolonged healing. Both friendship and intimacy involve connection, yes, but the nature, depth, and expectations of each are profoundly different. Emotional intimacy is about vulnerability. It's about letting someone see the parts of you that are unguarded, raw, and real. It's about showing up without armor. Friendship, in contrast, can exist without that same level of depth. It can be light, supportive, consistent, but it doesn't necessarily require the same emotional surrender or reciprocal vulnerability that intimacy demands. When someone with an avoidant attachment style offers friendship after a romantic relationship, what they are often offering is emotional distance, wrapped in the language of care. It sounds like a bridge between separation and connection, but it's rarely that. The avoidant often struggles to tolerate emotional closeness, especially when it begins to threaten their sense of control or autonomy. And because of this, they tend to redefine the relationship in terms they can tolerate, usually something that feels safer and less emotionally demanding, like friendship. But here's the trap: for someone who still loves them, especially someone who is anxiously attached, that friendship doesn't feel like a new beginning. It feels like a waiting room, a holding pattern, a maybe wrapped in the disguise of a no. You're still emotionally invested. You're still vulnerable. You're still operating from the blueprint of intimacy, but now within a container that no longer supports that level of emotional exchange. In friendship, you're not expected to meet deep emotional needs. You're not asked to build a future together. You don't resolve wounds from shared romantic history. You don't navigate the complexities of physical intimacy, attachment triggers, or abandonment fears. Those things belong in romantic or deeply intimate emotional bonds, not casual or reconstructed friendships that exist post-breakup. So when one person is trying to maintain emotional intimacy and the other is offering surface-level friendship, the result is a dynamic filled with tension, confusion, and emotional inconsistency. The anxious partner may find themselves overanalyzing texts, hoping for deeper and small gestures, clinging to every interaction as a sign that the avoidant is reconnected. They're not. They're just managing the connection in a way that feels safe to them. They're not inviting closeness, they're containing it. And that's why the difference between emotional intimacy and friendship must be clearly understood. True emotional intimacy requires presence, emotional accountability, and a willingness to be seen and known. Friendship, especially the kind offered by an avoidant post-breakup, is often a strategy to stay connected without that vulnerability. So if you're craving intimacy, validation, and deep emotional resonance, friendship with someone who has already rejected those parts of you will only keep you stuck. Understanding this difference sets you free. It helps you stop fighting for a version of connection that no longer exists and start honoring what your emotional world actually needs. Real intimacy or real closure, not something in between. Growth means learning to distinguish emotional breadcrumbs from real connection. It means you stop mistaking the occasional text, the vague check-in, the familiar warmth of a shared joke for a genuine investment in your emotional life. Because emotional breadcrumbs, those small inconsistent gestures from someone who won't meet you where you are not connection. They are a strategy, a pattern, a way for avoidant individuals to maintain your presence without showing up fully. And until you can recognize the difference, you'll keep confusing crumbs for a meal and wondering why you still feel emotionally starved. Breadcrumbs are subtle. That's what makes them powerful. They're just enough to stir your hope, just enough to keep you emotionally attached. Just enough to make you think something might be shifting, when in reality nothing has changed. You're still the one reaching, waiting, wondering. You're still stuck in a cycle of over-analyzing and under-receiving. And if you're someone with anxious attachment tendencies, that dynamic is especially painful, because it plays directly into your fear that love is inconsistent, that it must be, and that you have to work harder for someone to stay. But real connection doesn't feel like that. Real connection is consistent. It shows up. It doesn't disappear when emotions get complicated. It doesn't shrink away when you need more, or punish you for expressing how you feel. Real connection is mutual. It's grounded in shared vulnerability, mutual respect, and emotional availability. It's not built on you proving your worth or tolerating ambiguity just to stay close to someone who's only halfway. The shift happens when you start to look at the pattern, not the moment. Breadcrumbs always live in the moment. They thrive on nostalgia, sporadic affection, and just enough engagement to keep you hooked. But when you step back and look at the pattern, you'll see it clearly. They're not building with you. They're not growing with you. They're not meeting your emotional needs in any meaningless, sustained way. And here's the truth. People don't breadcrumb you because they're evil or manipulative. Most of the time they breadcrumb you because it works. It allows them to avoid guilt, responsibility, and emotional discomfort while keeping you emotionally available. It soothes their conscience and satisfies their need for control, but it leaves you chasing closeness that never fully materializes. Growth is when you stop chasing. It's when you stop negotiating your self-worth for moments of attention. It's when you stop accepting less